Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode If You Could Hide to Kolob podcast. Today, Clive, we've got a very special episode. We're here with Sister Carolyn Haynes, who is the Queensland Regional Church History Advisor. Sister Haynes has led a huge body of work preserving and recording the history of the church here in Queensland. And on the 24th of August at the Cleveland Chapel, there is going to be a video shown which steps through the history of the church here. And most people know how much I love history and how much I love Latter-day history. So I've been really excited to do this and I can't wait to have a chat.
Well, I am excited, Daniel, because we all know the church history originally, Joseph Smith and everything preceding Doctrine and Covenants. We know so much about church history. But people used to ask me when I was in California, what's church history in Australia? And I would say, I don't know. And that was sort of the end of it. So I'm excited to hear, to understand, and I'm sure a lot of people are, of how it all started, how it all came about here in Australia. So yeah, let's get into it and see what we can learn today.
Okay. Well, welcome, Sister Haynes. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for coming out and seeing us this morning. We're so excited to talk to you.
Well, yes, it's exciting. The church history in Australia, I guess, is pretty much different in every state. And I'm not across a lot of the rest of Australia, but I do know a bit about Queensland.
You must have a passion for church history. This hasn't. I'm assuming it's been a labor of love. I'm assuming that it's been enjoyable for you. Have you always had a passion of history? Like no one, the amount of work you put together, no one puts that together unless they, I guess, feel that it's good, feel that it's right.
Yes, since you mentioned that to me last week, I've been pondering, where did I get a love of history? And I don't know. I think really it comes just from a love of the gospel. And I've lived it. I've grown up in the church, and so all of these things that we're talking about, Gibbon Street, I heard about all the time. My parents were baptised there, and when the first stake was organised, I was only 3, and so I've lived all that time through there. I've always enjoyed church history, learning about the pioneers and all of that sort of thing. And a librarian was my career. So maybe it's just more of the keeping of the records, and it's approached from that side.
I guess you've understood or you've appreciated more than most people just how important record keeping is.
Yes, I think so.
So Gibbon Street is Woolloongabba?
Yes, a street in Woolloongabba.
Right.
And the chapel was built there, and it's just, everyone just refers to it as the Gibbon Street Chapel or the Gibbon Street era.
That's the picture on the flyer, right?
Yes, that's right.
And so there's 2 pictures. There's the bottom picture, and then there's the top picture, which the one on the left is the same chapel. What about the one on the right? That's the same?
Okay, the one on the right is actually the same chapel after it was sold and used by a different church, and they had a reunion there in 1979.
Right.
And they're the people that went to the reunion.
Okay. Well, let's go to the start, which is always a good place to start. Was it members that moved to Queensland, or was it revelation to send missionaries here first? What's the start? How did it start? That's where it comes.
Yes. I think some missionaries came in around about 1850-ish, whatever, and they were here maybe for a little while and found nobody and went home. Went back. So there was only one mission there. Then it was the Australia-New Zealand mission, and I think the headquarters were in New Zealand.
In mid-1800s.
I'm not exactly sure of when they
Yep.
came. But then around 1893, 2 elders came from Melbourne. They decided to come to Brisbane, and they came by ship.
They were sent to the Australia-New Zealand mission, and then part of that at some stage they've gone, okay, we've established something in Melbourne. We're going to travel to Queensland.
Yes, I think here it is. They were labouring in Victoria in 1890 when they felt impressed to travel north to Queensland.
Wow.
Because it was all one mission,
Yeah.
the whole country. Yeah.
And how good are the records? Do we know who they were?
Oh,
We
yes,
do.
Elder George Woolley
Yep.
and Almono Young. We don't have very good photos of them, but we do have kind of scratchy photos of them.
So who's William Duffin?
William Duffin was the first member that they found. So they were just about to give up and go back, but they discovered 3 people who had been baptized in England and immigrated to Australia. And that was William Duffin, his wife, Sarah, and their neighbour, Betty Leach. I think the missionaries had a street meeting or whatever, and the Duffins went
Yep.
because they'd been praying for missionaries to come,
Wow.
for something to happen. And so that's how it started. And by 1896, they had about 70 members, and the branch was organised.
From all of these came from these missionaries?
Well, they must,
Like, well, it was these missionaries that led the work.
that's right. I'm
There-
not sure how long they were actually there.
Yeah, but I mean, talk about the field being ripe.
That's right.
You know, these missionaries feel inspired to come up, and they do, and then before you know it, there's 70 members
Yes.
that are receiving gospel ordinances, I guess. And when they did it, they would have established a sacrament reasonably quickly.
They met in the Duffins' home. They met in a few different halls that they rented.
And are all of these places gone now?
Most of
Yep.
them.
Yeah. Okay.
As far as I know, yes, I think
It's
they
a
all
while
are.
ago.
Yes. Yeah.
And well, let's not get to the Gibbon Street Chapel yet, because that's later in our chronology. I don't want to skip over anything.
Well, that was only in 1904 that
1904, and at the moment we're in
96.
1890. My goodness. So by 1896, there's already 70 members in
Yes.
Queensland, all meeting in Brisbane at the Duffin's home or separate halls. Okay. And you talked about earlier when we were chatting that there was just one mission. There was just one mission through the whole thing. So would it have been the missionaries charged? Because they wouldn't have been able to write letters to go back to Salt Lake and say, "Hey, we've got 70 members. Where do you want us to go?" They would have probably just traveled around, or maybe more missionaries would have got sent.
Well, they would have had the mission office was originally in Victoria, in Melbourne.
So there would have been a mission president?
Yes, there was a mission president.
Okay, so mission president and had missionaries around.
Yes,
I
yes. It
didn't
was
realize
it was a bit organised.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was so well established so early. Yeah, that's what I didn't realize, just how early it was.
1890 says here the mission president was Angus Wright, or then John S. Bingham. And so, yeah, every few years there's a new mission president.
Yeah.
But John Murdoch was one of the first mission presidents in the Australian mission in 1851.
51. So the pioneers haven't even finished, right? In
No, that's
1851,
right.
I wonder if that was, if Joseph Smith had anything to do with it before his martyrdom, if he said we need to head to Australia, or it was Brigham Young who said we need to head to Australia. That's super interesting. I wonder what the revelation was, because it was either one of them. It would, and if it was Joseph Smith, it would have taken, then it was sort of 5 years later, but they would have had to have boarded ship.
Well, there is a quote by Joseph Smith. I don't know it off by heart.
Yeah.
It's in the video, and he talks about sending missionaries to New Holland. Includes that in all the thing. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. So Australia was on Joseph Smith's mind.
Yes.
That's unbelievable.
The whole world was.
So the church is established. What were you? 1896
1896, the first branch was
established up here in
officially
Queensland.
organised.
Okay, great. And the members, it gets to a point then, because there's 70, it gets to a stage where they say, "Hey, we actually need somewhere to go. We can't, like old mate Duffin, he's going, get out of my house. You can't all fit. There's too many."
Yes. By the turn of the century, they had a sort of it was a building. The missionaries had rooms there where they lived, and there was a big room upstairs where they would hold meetings, sacrament meeting and Sunday school and different things like that.
Yeah.
So it says by the turn of the century, the branch had almost 130 members.
130 members and still meeting in Brisbane.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this to you, this Conrad Trost.
Yes.
Like, so what I know of Conrad is, so my wife, Conrad is my wife's, I'm gonna say great, maybe 3 greats or 4 greats grandfather
And he joined the church in Toowoomba.
in Toowoomba, right, so his story was, they would cross rivers or something,
That's right.
Elisa's nan will watch this, and she'll be spewing that I don't know enough about it, but she gave me some wonderful information, and, Conrad Trost sort of, he was a bit of a pioneer, I think, in that area, and then he ended up getting to Gibbon Street because I think, him and then his family were baptized in Gibbon Street, and perhaps he even
Yes.
helped build it. Members helped build it.
Well, yeah. So he would have been there maybe in the 1910 to
Okay, so it was
20s,
already built.
that time period.
Yeah.
I think he came. I actually was reading some of his journal. I had a page out of it. I can't remember the year that was on. He talks about being ordained when he joined the church, and then he was ordained a deacon and a teacher and a priest. He has this in his journal.
Wow,
Um,
unreal.
yeah, and that was like in the 1912, 1915, around about that time, I think.
Yeah, okay.
But what I do know about Conrad Trost is he was responsible for building the font
The
at
font.
Gibbon Street.
Yes, okay, so so he built the font, and that was a really special memory and a special thing held in the family.
And so that was in 1930.
Oh, right. So baptisms were in Brisbane River?
Eckerman Creek, I had read somewhere where someone else was baptized at Lota, which is in the bay,
Oh, okay, somewhere. Yeah.
Manly.
Yeah,
You
right,
know,
right.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was wherever.
Build a font straight away for any particular reason? They didn't have the skill set early on, they
Well,
didn't need
they
to?
might not have thought about it. The way of Gibbon Street Chapel, like, it's a very simple building. So if you look at the front of it, had steps going up the side. You went inside, and there was the chapel. And behind there were a couple of bedrooms where the missionaries slept. There was an attic upstairs where the missionaries slept once it got bigger. And they used these rooms for classrooms. There was a bit of a kitchen out the back. So that was the chapel. It was not very big. So they had a pulpit at one end. The baptismal font was actually underneath there. So they lifted up the floor, and the baptismal font was underneath.
That would have taken a bit of engineering.
Yeah, it was concrete font.
Yep.
Was built. And so when they needed to fill it, they had to run a hose from the kitchen or the chip heater. People won't even know what a chip
No,
heater
I was about to say,
is.
what's a chip heater?
And I couldn't even hardly tell you.
Okay.
But it wasn't a wooden stove that heated the water, but it was this little
So the water was
the
warm.
water was heated.
Oh, right.
The water was heated in this chip heater. They use that for their bathroom. So they
Okay.
put the water, they had to run hose over the floor into the font.
And so
And
did they have to pull up floorboards and, like, literally lift?
They had, well, it was like a trapdoor thing.
Okay.
So they lifted that up. That's how they had baptisms.
Sure.
And of course, so you didn't have a baptism just every week or whenever. Even the children, when they turned 8, they'd wait till there was a group of them, and they'd have the baptisms on Saturdays, or because it was such a to-do to fill it up and then empty it. And
So by this stage, I hope we're not skipping too many detail, but by the time they're doing baptisms, is it a ward now? Is there a bishop?
no, there was no stake.
There was no stake. Okay.
So it was all mission. So it was district and branches.
Okay. And do we know who that branch president was? Do we know their names at all? Is it that good, or did they get a bit?
They are all somewhere
Okay.
because they kept mission records.
Because I was just wondering if anyone's descendants, like, all these families, the trust, for example. So, all these families are still floating around now.
Well, that's right. So for a lot of times it was missionaries that ran the branch. Missionaries did everything. But in 1929, the mission president there came to Brisbane and organised actual members to run the branch. So the first native-born branch president there was Archibald Campbell, and that was in 1929. And he had to have counsellors, and so they ran the branch. And I think mostly from that time on, it was members running the branch.
What type of material did they have? Because I know when the church was established in England, there was, there was, I think it was like a British hymn book, wasn't there? Yeah, and pamphlets that were made there, because obviously the members knew zero. Was there any like I mean, I don't know if anyone would have got a first edition Book of Mormon, but there was Book of Mormon's being produced, so they must have come out. And was there enough? Did anyone get given Book of Mormons, and how did all of that work?
Well, the missionaries would have had to bring all of that. It would have come from the missionary and through the mission office. So the mission would have ordered supplies and things like that. But do you think the mission
Yeah.
president was like a stake president? So he would have to organize all of that.
And he was still in Victoria at this stage?
At some stage, they moved to Sydney.
Okay, so as in the
Yeah.
church's headquarters moved
Oh,
to Sydney.
yes.
Okay, so at some stage, church headquarters go to Sydney, and they're ordering Book of Mormons from Salt Lake. They're ordering um, hymn books. They're ordering Sunday school manuals.
I almost bought with me some old hymn books. Like I've got one from about 1909, Songs for Deseret.
And that's what it was called?
Yeah. And for Mutual too, they had different songbooks and stuff, but it was all from America.
You did make the last part that a few of the members ended up moving to America. Did that affect the growth of the church for a while?
It did for a while. And I think more people maybe from Sydney and Melbourne went, not so much from Queensland, although there were some families that went.
I can understand why
Part
you would
of
want to
family.
move out of Victoria. I can understand why you would want to move out of Queensland.
Right. Parts of families might have gone.
Okay.
Like I think like with the Orth family, they were a pioneering family, and some of the children moved to America and some are still here, and their descendants are here too.
Right. Okay.
The Archibald Campbell, so he's connected to the Mora family. So you might know Elder Mora, who's
Yeah, Elder Murray, yeah.
yeah. So Archibald Campbell is his great grandfather.
And Campbell is quite a popular name now, so I wonder if there's any.
No, because his son Alan
Yeah.
only had 3 daughters.
That's a problem in our family. We've all only got daughters. That's an issue, right? That's interesting. Okay, so what year are we at? We're at
We were at 1930, but the chapel was built in 1904.
1904. Okay, 1904. The members finally get somewhere to go and worship that isn't at someone's house, and it's ran by the missionaries. And then in 1929, the first branch president, Archibald, is called, and he will then subsequently call councillors. And so the church is then really organized and can stand on its own 2 feet without having to rely on missionaries.
Well, the missionaries were still a big part
Right.
of the
But
branch.
Sunday school and stuff like that? Or?
Yes. Maybe not so much for leaders, but they would have helped out. Like some of the people we interviewed on the video, so let me think, they were born probably in about the 1930s.
Okay.
So the time period that they're talking about is 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Right.
And things like they were blessed by missionaries, they were baptized by missionaries, not necessarily their fathers, like we would do today. Or even sometimes they were blessed or baptized by one of the branch presidency or one of the leaders rather than their fathers. It was just
Gotcha.
a little bit different.
Yeah. Okay. So the missionaries are really still a vital part to the ongoing
Yes.
organization of the gospel here. Okay.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Do we know if Australian missionaries were going around at this time?
So a lot of when President Lillenquist was the mission president in the 50s, he started calling Australians to serve in Australia. And one of the sisters that we interviewed, Sister Val Croucher, who was Val Campbell, she was the first sister called in Australia, and she served in Australia.
Wow. And where was her mission?
Mostly down south in Victoria.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that would have been the most densely populated place at the time, right?
So there were quite a few of the young people, sisters and elders, who were called to serve in Australia. And that really, I think that's started to really establish the church and the leadership and everything in the country. So that was in the 50s that sort of started.
So the church is really starting to now become massively established because there's people who have got their own testimony, so much so that they're educated in the gospel, so much so that they can now go out and actually convert people.
You're starting to get families, that second generation of the people who've been brought up in the church.
So the church has been established, missionaries are now going out. Is it still Gibbon Street, or do we now have, I'm not gonna say lots of chapels. Is it just Gibbon Street still?
Right up to the 50s, it was still Gibbon Street. In Nambour, there was a branch established, or in 1936, they had a building that was their chapel.
So there's members are starting to be established up there on the Sunshine Coast area.
Pioneering family up there was the Atkinson family.
Okay. And they moved from Brisbane? Or
No.
the missionaries found them?
Yes, yes.
It's a big trek for
Missionaries
the
from there.
missionaries back then.
And there was a branch established at Ipswich.
Right.
My parents actually joined the church in Ipswich in 1951. They came to Gibbon Street to be baptised. So when they were then driving home with the missionaries who baptised them, and there was another family who joined the church at the time, they discussed, wouldn't it be great if we had our own chapel? A week later, they had a building committee organised.
Oh, wow.
I know, it's like,
I mean, talk about getting on with it.
and they started building their own chapel. They raised money and bought land, and the members themselves would work every Saturday and holiday and building the chapel. Well, that was in 51.
Right. So now there's 2 chapels, one built by the members.
Well, it hasn't been built yet.
Oh,
Hold on.
okay.
They're
That's-
working on it.
yeah, it's still going on.
Yeah. In 1955,
Yeah.
President McKay came out to Australia. So he was the first prophet to visit Australia. And he travelled all around and visited the different places. He laid the cornerstone for the Ipswich Chapel. And after he then went back, the church building program became established in Australia. And so then the church sent out building supervisors and more chapels started being built. And that's when a lot of chapels, I think they built 14 chapels over the next 2 years or so, all throughout Australia.
So President McKay had seen the work at Gibbon Street, then gone out to Ipswich and seen the work that the members were doing, that they're doing this by themselves because they just wanted a place to be. He puts the cornerstone block in.
Yeah.
And then goes back and goes, the work is growing. We need to put something in place. The work is growing massively in Australia.
So by 1957, they had the chapel in Toowoomba was built. The one, 50 would be 56. The chapel in Ipswich was built,
Yeah.
finished.
Is that there now?
No,
Is the block there now? Is it a paddock?
it's
Is
a road.
It's a road.
It's a road, yeah. And so Toowoomba Chapel was finished. So the Ipswich Chapel was finished off by the church building program, and then Toowoomba was built. Then Camp Hill was called Coorparoo Branch, was built in 57, and Kangaroo Point, the state chapel, then was built in 58. And that's when the members moved from Gibbon Street to Kangaroo Point.
Within 3 years, there was 6 buildings.
Well, Kangaroo Point, Toowoomba, Coorparoo, and Ipswich,
Yeah.
4. Well, okay, so the branch at Gibbon Street,
Yeah.
by 1952, they divided the branch into 3. So it was divided in, so they had a branch at Maruka, Brisbane branch,
Yeah.
which was there, and at Coorparoo,
Okay.
which then became the Camp Hill.
And so even back, like in our ward, we have 3 chapels meeting. It's a nightmare. It's good. It's funny to hear that 70 years ago that was happening as well.
And then Chermside was built just a couple of years.
How are you finding this information, by the way? Is this through talking to people? Is this through just going through newspapers? How on earth did you get, there's a lot we've only been talking for half an hour, but this I'm assuming this is representing years of, well, who even knew where to start, who to talk to first.
I think there were a lot of other people before me who gathered the history, um, but I lived that history. My family were involved in it.
Yeah, like
So
you guys are the pioneers.
yes, like my father was head of the building committee in Ipswich because he was a builder.
So does it bring you a certain pride that your family chose to listen to the missionaries way back then and are really part of the church being established here?
To me, it's absolutely amazing because when you look at when they joined the church, the branch only had about 30 to 40 people. So you consider changing your whole life, joining this religion who at that time, I mean, people were still thinking about polygamy
Yes, of
and
course. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
everyone going to America and
Yep,
all of that sort of
yep.
thing. Um, they joined this religion mixed with 30 other people. So, where was I think you wouldn't want to join a group if you knew there were only 30 people there. You sort of, there's no foundation. But they did it.
So it's like just the spirit that they must have felt and the
Yes.
revelatory experiences that they were having that they knew this is right, this is what I have to do,
Yes.
and I'm going to be a part of pushing this work forward. And so did your father, um, and did your father ever, I don't, you don't have to talk about anything super personal, but did your father ever share with you anything that he absolutely knew that this was what he should do?
Yeah. My father had a dream before he was baptized, and he dreamt that he was in this beautiful garden. I think I've got it right. I don't know. And his parents were outside, but he was the only one that could open the gate to let them into the garden. And he was a bit worried. He spoke to the missionary who baptized him before they got baptized. He said, "Oh, am I a bit wishy washy?" He was brought up Salvation Army. Then to marry my mother, he was confirmed baptized in the Church of England.
Right. He's had a taste of it all.
And so, this is about 6 or 7 years after that, then he's joining another church. And so he was worried, was he a bit wishy-washy? But no, he gained a testimony. Look, we have a letter that they wrote to my grandmother a couple of weeks after they were baptized, and they say, "We've never been happier."
Wow. And where was your grandmother at the time that he wrote the letter?
Blackheart, because that's where my father grew up, and that's
Right. Okay, well, no one will know where that.
Could you tell us about this documentary that you're bringing out?
how that came about. People got together and they created the Gibbon Street Chapel Restoration Association. And it's an actual association, government.
Registered with the government.
So we had a meeting. I remember going to that with my mother, and everybody joined up and paid a membership fee. And we got a certificate saying we were members. And the plan was to hopefully move the chapel somewhere and restore it.
Literally back of a truck.
Yeah,
Right.
that sort of thing,
Yeah.
move it. Because they knew that the Lutheran Church were thinking about selling it, I think.
And the Lutheran Church had bought it after they'd moved to Kangaroo Point?
Yes. So there was a bit of discussion about it. Well, then by 2001, they realized that all their attempts to look for ways and means of doing it, it just wasn't going to happen. Even if you restored the building, what would you do with it then?
And where would it go?
Where would it go?
What's that in your backyard? Oh, it's the Gibbon Street Chapel.
That's
Awesome.
right. That's right. They were thinking there were some chapels that had extra land. They thought maybe they could,
Yeah.
get permission to put it there. But then what would you do with it? You'd have to bring it up to code as well. And does that destroy the actual historical value? All of those things. But they decided that it just wasn't going to happen. So they called a meeting, and actually the meeting only had about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 people came.
Okay.
So
Do you
And
remember
rem
turning up going, "Oh, no."
So they were the people that were interested in going to the meeting at that time.
Yep.
And it was decided, they did a report up. It was decided that a subcommittee produce a suitable historical video of the Gibbon Street Chapel within the constraints of the approximately $3,000 funds owned by the association. So the association had $3,000 by that time from the membership and things. Okay. That's 2001. So I agreed to go onto the subcommittee
Nice.
to help with producing a video.
Yeah.
In 2001, it was a video.
Yeah.
And so it went from there. But within about 12 months, the actual president of the association had died. I think that's when I became president of the association because there was nobody else.
Yeah. Where?
And the secretary treasurer guy, Ross Geddes, now he is the historian.
Right.
He is the one that has done so much research on church history in Australia, in Queensland.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he passed away in 2010. So he was a bit of a
Giving you the title of the historic
well,
person
yeah.
in Queensland.
Anyway, using his notes and
Yeah,
his,
sure.
his records.
Yeah.
And so the subcommittee, I mean, some of those people, they left, they went on missions. Some of them just are no longer with us. And I'm basically the last man standing.
Wow.
Of the 9.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you just made it your mission
And
to
I
just
guess-
get this done. Finish.
Well, every year I have to send a report into the government, the financial, reconcile the books, all of that sort of thing. I don't want to be doing that for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I wanted to wind up the association, but to wind up the association, I've got to spend the money. So we
Right.
had to get this finished so that we could spend the money.
And if you didn't, it would just go to the government.
Yes,
Oh, yeah. Well, don't do that.
that's right. Anything to do.
Yeah, don't do that.
So that's kind of, and I think at the beginning, we didn't really know what to do. How do you start? What do you do? We started by collecting photographs that we could from people. We got a few stories from people.
Because you just knew the families, just because you're
Because-
part of it.
because these and some of these people, like Jan Atkinson, so she grew up in Gibbon Street. She was baptized there,
Right.
and she was a historian. She collected everything.
Wow.
She had tons of stuff that I'm still going through. Photos and all of that sort of thing. So we just collected whatever we could. Then eventually, by about 2010, we actually did some interviews of people who we wanted. And then we finally interviewed Jan in 2016. And out of all the people we interviewed, there's only 2 still alive. So we just sort of tried to do the next thing. What's the next thing we need to
One
do?
foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just keep moving.
Originally, we had all these ideas and we'd do reenactments and all these things. No,
Yeah. No.
we're not going to do
Yeah.
that.
No.
It
Yeah.
got simpler and simpler, and we've just done the best we can with the resources we had.
That's amazing. Well, I'm super excited to see the video.
But we're excited that it's finished.
I bet you're going to wonder what to do with all your time now.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so the video's done, and we're seeing that on the 24th of August at 3 p.m. at the Cleveland Chapel. So that's going to be really exciting. And do people have to register for that? Do they just rock up?
No,
turn
they
up?
just come.
Yeah, great. You talked earlier about some of the material, some of the pamphlets or the little books you've got because the church was producing. It wasn't a magazine; it was the Oz Star.
Austral Star.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is a monthly record of what was going on in the church at the time. So this one I'm holding is October 1958, and it's an editorial. So during this period of time, this is in February 1955, President David O. McKay and Sister McKay toured Australia, visiting the cities of Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Adelaide. Perth doesn't get a shout. In July 1955, Elder and Sister Marion G. Romney visited Australia. Oh, wow. And then other people, lots of people. So then there were people called, building progress, that's New Perth Chapel, New Box Hill Chapel, New Brisbane, New Sutherland. It's amazing.
Yeah. So that was put out by the mission.
How's this? Mormon Yankees are victorious. On the evening of August 29, 1958, the Victorian State Basketball Championship playoff was held in the Melbourne Showgrounds. The Mormon Yankee team, comprised of Mormon missionaries, was pitted against Melbourne YMCA team for a near capacity crowd for the championship trophy. That is unbelievable.
Yes, there was, yes. And they toured all around Australia, the Mormon Yankees,
Really?
and played basketball. Yeah.
That's unbelievable. So who was charged with was this a calling? Was this someone's job?
Well, the mission president was
This was
in charge of it. Yeah.
There's a bit in here about President Taylor announcing the passing of Elder Clifford E. Young, London Temple, and then branch and district activities. This is so much work.
So all the branches throughout the country, and of course they were all branches, there were no stakes, submitted a report every month.
These are collected somewhere in archives.
Yes, and they are all digitized.
Yep.
A couple of years ago, there was a project in the Church Preservation Centre down in Sydney. So the church has decentralised a lot of their history, and so the Australian records are now being kept in Australia. They're digitised and they then go on the church history website, so people can actually look them up, and that you should be able to find the Austral Stars on the church history website.
And how long did the Austral Star go for? Do you know? When was it around for a decade?
Well, it went from 1929
Yep.
at least until 1958. You've got 58 there. Probably went up until the stakes started being formed in 1960. Yes, and we were sort of, because they were in Ipswich, they weren't as much with the Gibbons Street people, but they came there for conference all the time.
Right.
All the district conferences were held in Brisbane.
Yeah, that's amazing. What are some of the is there anything that when you've been interviewing these people, is there anything that really stands out to you about, the hand of the Lord in this establishment of the church? Is there anything that really, things that are happening to people? Obviously, your father's got have some amazing stories, but anyone else that you've talked to that that we've been steered in this direction?
No, we didn't actually get a lot of stories of how they joined the church.
Right.
It was very interesting that the interviews, and look, we didn't know what we were doing,
Sure.
did we?
Yeah,
We're
sounds like
doing,
our podcast. Yeah.
the committee came up with a list of questions.
Yep.
And they just about asked everybody the same question. And the one about being baptized, they
The question was, where were you
the
baptized?
question was, where were you baptized and how did you feel about it?
Yep.
And of course, a lot of the ones we asked, they were baptized when they were children.
Sure.
And actually, I do know one.
Right.
I do know one, and I got it from a different interview I was doing. Sister Maura. Now, her family lived on a farm out at Inala.
Yeah.
That was a fair way from Gibbon Street,
Mm.
right? So they were on a farm, and this one day, Tess and her brother Arthur were left at home to look after the farm. The parents had gone out somewhere, and they were supposed to do the milk cows. Didn't really want to. Anyway, along comes this soldier. So it was in the 40s, an American soldier. Now, how he got there, who knows? He'd obviously he was on leave and must have been wandering around, and he stopped at their place and they started speaking to him, and it ended up he milked the cows for them. So they were happy to have him there because he could milk. And so he must have come back at one stage. I'm not exactly sure how it ties in, but he was a member of the church.
Right.
And that was their first contact with the church. And then after that, for some reason, some reason they started going to church, and the missionaries started coming out to them. So
This
that
random
was
soldier walking
just
around in Nala.
that's right.
What's
That's
he
right.
doing out there?
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, they used to, catch the horse to ride to church or hitch up the buggy or whatever.
In the 1940s. Yeah, holy doolies, that's good.
Because they were on a farm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And where
And I've probably got some of that story wrong, but there was definitely a
no,
soldier.
there was a soldier
He
involved.
was he was a member of the church.
Yeah.
And, yes, and the
And
mi
would they have
yeah.
gone to so when they went to church, would they have gone to Gibbon Street?
Yes, they went to Gibbon Street. That's where they were baptized, and that's where they
So that would have taken them hours, right? Hours to get there?
taken a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these stories, are these the things we're going to get to see in the documentary?
Yes. Yes.
The actual people, or at least relatives of the people.
Well, no, we have 10 actual people that are giving their stories about how they felt about Gibbon Street and different what life was like.
Okay, so you've spent, the best part of 20 years putting all of this history together, something that we're so grateful for that you've been able to just push through and I'm sure it wasn't easy. And at times it made me think, is it still happening?
Well, there was a lot of times when we thought, is anyone even going to want to look at this? All the people that we're talking about have died.
Yeah.
It's like, are they
Yeah.
really interested? But yeah, I've had some experiences while I've been putting this together. For example, in 2020, I'd probably started a bit more doing it, and I was thinking more about it. And I realized we needed to get the signed release forms from all the people that we interviewed,
Okay.
right? So at the beginning of the year, I felt an urgency that I had to actually go out and visit them all. And I did that in February of 2020,
Right before COVID.
right before COVID. So didn't know about COVID in February of 2020.
Yeah.
March we did.
Yeah.
So I was able to get all of these release forms signed. And within a few months, that 2 or 3 of them had died anyway.
That's amazing.
So I just, yeah, I thought about that. That was amazing that I did it. I was impressed that I actually did it. Yeah.
Yeah, it just shows the Lord. The Lord is in the detail. Tell me about what you've been through this whole journey now, and the video's gonna be amazing, and can't wait to watch it, and I'm so stoked that we've been able to talk today. What do you if there's people who are thinking, "What's my history?" Like, we know a bit of our history, right? Our grandfather has our granddad on dad's side's done a body of work, a lot of work from history, and Elise's nan's done tons of work family history. But if there's people out there who are not sure or there's recording things family tree, and then there's what you're doing. There's, um, do you have any advice or do you have any starting points if someone's going, "Well, I want to find that out about my region or my family or my cousin was in this remote area." How should someone go about it? Like, what should they do?
Well, start now. Do it immediately. Keep your own history.
Okay.
If you don't know your own history,
Is my own history just as many grandparents as I know?
your own history is, where did you go to school? What who were your friends at school? What was your favorite ice cream? All of those sorts of things.
That's my own history.
Yeah, that's your own history.
Okay.
Okay. When we started talking about Gibbon Street, Mum would always say, "Oh, yeah, we've got a photo of Beryl being baptized at Gibbon Street." So Beryl's my elder sister. That's the photo. So what can you tell from that? It could have been anything, anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. You can't tell it was at the chapel.
No,
Or
no, we need to put dates and context on your photos. Even if you just went through your photos and wrote a story about your photo.
right. Okay. So this is a picture of X. I was in this place. I think it was this time. We were there for this reason, and person taking the photo was this person. Okay, just a few things and the date.
The date, yeah. And I had a great time.
time.
Yeah, something about it, something about that.
Okay.
So I was only when I got that photo out, I saw this one as well. That's one of my elder
And
brothers.
are you just finding these things in stuff you've got at home?
Yeah, it was stuff we've got at home. Yeah. So when I looked at that, now there's no date on that,
Oh,
but when I looked at it, I realized that was taken at Gibbon Street
I was gonna say, are they the stairs and the
because
handrail
in the
going up?
handrail. Yeah. So odds on it was taken that same day
Right.
because when she was 8, he would have been 2 or 3.
Yep. Okay. So probably take a photo, take a photo.
Yeah.
Right. So he'll say, "Oh, please, could you have not written down what the problem?"
Well, when mum and dad were there,
Yeah, it was fine.
it was fine.
Yeah, they're like, "We're here. What do we need to write it down? I know what we."
That's right.
Yeah.
So you need to organize what you've got at home. Start with what you've got, then ask people, speak to people, and speak to them now. If you've got grandparents or aunties and uncles, speak to them about your family's history.
Right.
And yeah, as far as your church history, you just have to speak to people who were there, find it out.
If there's something that happened in our church history, which maybe there is, I don't know, would would the church want to know that history? Would someone in the church, like,
Yes.
I mean, we've got no Australian church history. I mean, our wives would, but, I mean, we've got church history in England. If we came across something, would we and, "Oh, hey, that sounds important," or, "They did this at the chapel at the time." Like, I know our, um, grandparents on my dad's side, I think they were heavily involved in Runcorn Chapel and cleaning it, and I don't wanna look it up, but I think that they did that for many years. They were proud of the chapel and would go there often to clean it up. Is that something the church would be interested in, or is that something you just take a note of?
Would be very interesting. So, there is now an Australian Church History Centre located at Carlingford in New South Wales.
Right.
Right? It includes the Australian Records Preservation Centre, where collections are catalogued, stored, and preserved. Members can donate items to the Church History Centre for preservation. Donated materials are catalogued and stored. They can, under title, event, organisation, or family name. You know, the collections are listed in the Church History Library catalogue for access throughout the world. Items include histories, journals, biographies, photographs, newspaper clippings, correspondence, programs of significant church events, newsletters, periodicals, books, memorabilia, and artifacts.
One person gives a little bit of information, and then another person gives a little bit. They just collect all of that.
They've got the history. The history is made up of everybody's story. Everybody has their own story.
Why is it important? I just thought of that question there. Why is it important?
I've got a quote for you about history. I'm always talking about history. Talking about the history of something lends importance to it. There's a feeling of connection to other people long ago, a feeling of greater significance, and an overall whole. It gives us our roots. It helps know who we are when we're connected to history.
Well, we're very grateful for this opportunity that speaks to you. We're grateful for all the effort that you've put in. It's not, I feel like nowadays people are more focused on the future, and we don't really get that opportunity to see things from the past. And learning our church history is just, it's like you said, we do feel more connected with it. We feel like there is a significance. Like we've spoken about before, I guess we took advantage of the church in Australia. We didn't realize something in how much painstaking people actually went through to get the gospel to be able to spread around. And we're just grateful that there's people out there like you that have been to collect these things, and that we can, and we're so excited to watch this documentary and to truly get an understanding of the people that were there and the people that have these stories.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
So in 1940, they had a Jubilee celebration because it was 50 years since the missionaries had come to Queensland. And they had this. At that time, the branch presidency, they put out a program. I thought I brought it, but I didn't. But this is a quote, and we finished the video with this quote because this is why we've done it. Okay. May we be inspired to greater service, faith, humility, and devotion to our Father in heaven by the splendid example set for us by the pioneers of the church in Queensland. May we prove worthy to those valiant men and women and ever hold aloft the torch of truth and righteousness. As of them, may instead of us, they builded well the glory of their God. I just think that's amazing that they wrote that in 1940. And it applies today just as much.
Right.
And that's the reason I've done it, really.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your service and thank you for spending time with us. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you for tuning in to If You Could Hide to Cola podcast, and we will see you next week. Thank you.